They tell you power comes from confidence, from authenticity, from being good to others. You believe that truth speaks louder than manipulation, that kindness wins. But if that were true, you would be the one in control, right now. You would not be questioning the quiet unease that follows you in rooms where someone else smiles too much. You would not have stories in your memory where you gave and they took, again and again. You have been taught to spot danger in anger, to fear loud threats. But the real danger has a quiet voice, steady breath, and a smile that never reaches the eyes. That is not a glitch in human behavior. It is the design. The rules of power are not the ones written in books about leadership or communication. The rules are older, colder, hidden inside the layers of what psychologists call dark psychology. Dark psychology is not fiction. It is the unspoken system that governs who bends and who commands. It is the psychological framework that explains manipulation, deception, and emotional control used to gain advantage, not only by criminals or sociopaths, but by the charming boss, the persuasive partner, even the polished politician. They are not breaking the system. They are fluent in its real language. If you have ever walked away from a conversation feeling drained, but unsure why, someone spoke to you in that language. If you ever said yes when your instincts screamed no, you were under its influence. This language is subtle. It is the gaze that holds too long. It is the timing of silence. It is the feigned vulnerability that earns your sympathy and opens your trust. Once inside, it rewires your decisions. It speaks to your subconscious while your logic is distracted. In 2002, researchers at the University of British Columbia explored the dark triad, Machiavellianism, narcissism, and psychopathy, as measurable traits that correlate with manipulation and domination. What they found was not only that these traits exist on a spectrum, but that those with higher scores in Machiavellianism often succeed in leadership roles. Why? Because they understand the true mechanics of power, suppress emotion, predict reactions, and use others without conscience. So ask yourself, if power favors those who conceal their intent, then what does that say about our obsession with transparency? Is authenticity just the bait we are told to swallow while real power hides in calculated silence? You want to be free from manipulation, yet you hesitate to see how often you have already surrendered to it. From advertisements that exploit your fears, to relationships that reward your obedience, the language of power is being spoken around you constantly, and you never learned it in school. What if everything you were taught about right and wrong was never about truth, but control? What if those who taught you how to behave were only repeating what they were taught, not because it was right, but because it was safe? There is no safety in ignorance, and there is no power in denial. You are either aware of dark psychology, or you are vulnerable to it. The very idea that good intentions are enough to survive in a world ruled by covert influence is not just naive, it is dangerous. But before you draw conclusions, stay here. Because what if I told you, the very instincts that make you human, that drive your empathy, your desire to belong, your fear of isolation, what if they are not just weaknesses to exploit, but keys to understanding how you have been controlled all along? You might think you understand manipulation, but what you are about to learn is not how to spot a liar. It is how to spot the system that keeps you willingly chained to the lie. And the deeper truth, the one hidden even from those who abuse it, is waiting to be revealed. You were raised to believe that power belongs to those who are honest, fair, and virtuous, that people who manipulate, deceive, or exploit will eventually be exposed and fall. You may still believe it now. Despite everything you have seen, that belief is not harmless optimism. It is a carefully sustained illusion, one that keeps most people submissive, compliant, and blind to how the world really works. The reality is colder. Power does not belong to the honest. It belongs to those who understand how to shape perception, how to trigger emotion, and how to control outcomes while remaining unseen. In this world, manipulation is not a flaw, it is a form of intelligence. And the ones who master it are rewarded, not punished. This idea might feel wrong to you. That is no accident. Social conditioning trains you to recoil from the idea of dark psychology. It teaches you to associate it with evil or villainy. But dark psychology is not evil in itself. It is a tool, and like any tool, it can be used to build or destroy. But make no mistake, those who rule understand it. those who win often use it. The Stanford prison experiment, led by Philip Zimbardo in 1971, revealed how ordinary people, given power and no accountability, quickly resorted to psychological abuse. It took less than 6 days for the simulation to become dangerous. What mattered was not personality, but the system that gave permission. This was not an exception, it was a mirror. You want to believe people are naturally good, but history and science do not support that fully. According to psychologist Roy Baumeister, the human capacity for cruelty is not rare, it is widespread, and what allows it to grow is not hatred but justification. People will hurt others if they believe it serves a higher goal, if they believe they are still good. That is the secret. Power is rarely taken by those who call themselves villains. It is taken by those who appear righteous, while quietly pulling the strings. They use fear to unify. They use love to disarm. They speak softly, but their goals are sharp. And here is what they know. Even if you do not, people are more likely to follow those who appear confident, even if that confidence is built on lies. People are more likely to obey when they fear isolation than when they fear punishment. And people are easier to control when they believe they are choosing freely. This is why the illusion survives. It flatters your ego. It tells you that you are too smart to be fooled, too moral to be used. It paints the manipulator as an outlier, not as a neighbor, a teacher, a friend, or a partner. But the truth is, the greatest manipulation is the one that convinces you it does not exist. So you are left with a choice. Continue believing in the comfort of that lie, or begin to see through the fog that was placed over your eyes since childhood. The question you must ask yourself is not, do people manipulate me, but how often do I allow it, just to avoid discomfort? If you have felt that tension before, the quiet sense that something is off in your relationships, your workplace, your society, that is not paranoia, that is your awareness waking up. Do not silence it. If this is hitting somewhere deep inside you, now is the moment to stay alert. This is not entertainment, this is a warning. You have only just begun to see the edges of what lies underneath. Like this video. If you feel it speaks a truth you were never allowed to say out loud, subscribe. Not for the algorithm, but because the next truths are darker. Leave a comment below. Not for me, for you, to speak. Finally, without fear. Power is not built on strength, it is built on perception. The person who controls what others see, feel, and believe is the one who holds real influence. That influence does not shout, it whispers. It molds minds silently, while the crowd looks the other way. To understand how power functions beneath the surface, you must begin with dark psychology, the operating system behind manipulation, fear, and silent control. At its core, dark psychology studies how individuals use deception, coercion, and emotional exploitation to gain advantage. It is not limited to criminal minds or shadow figures. It is present in boardrooms, bedrooms, and ballots. The terms may differ: persuasion, motivation, leadership, but the mechanisms are the same. In 2002, researchers Delroy Powerless and Kevin Williams identified the dark triad: Machiavellianism, Narcissism, and Psychopathy. These traits are not pathologies in the clinical sense. They are personality dimensions found on a scale, and yes, many who score high on them appear charming, competent, and trustworthy. That is exactly what makes them effective. Machiavellianism, named after Niccolò Machiavelli, centers on manipulation, strategic planning, and emotional detachment. A high Machiavellian individual will not act from impulse. They calculate. They watch how people react. They build influence through delayed moves. Their strength lies in control, not chaos. Narcissism, in this context, is not just self-love. It is the hunger for admiration, dominance, and status, often at the cost of truth. Narcissists use others as mirrors, not as people. Their power comes from crafting an image and punishing anyone who refuses to reflect it back. Psychopathy brings emotional coldness. Not all psychopaths are violent. Many are intelligent and socially fluent. Their lack of empathy allows them to manipulate without guilt. They spot weaknesses in others, the way a predator senses injury. Their decisions are not guided by conscience, but by gain. Together, these traits do not form a monster. They form a method, a quiet system of control that relies not on force, but influence. And this system is rewarded in many modern environments, in competitive industries, in politics, in high-conflict relationships. People who use dark psychology often rise faster, not because they cheat, but because they understand the unspoken rules. The rules are simple. People respond more to certainty than truth. People follow leaders who act confident, even when they are wrong. People avoid confrontation, so they comply when pressured, especially if the pressure is emotional, not physical. That is not a flaw, that is human nature. In 1974, psychologist Stanley Milgram demonstrated that ordinary individuals would administer what they believed to be lethal electric shocks to another person, just because an authority figure told them to. These were not bad people, they were obedient, and that obedience, when triggered by fear, social proof, or perceived legitimacy, becomes a weapon in the hands of someone who understands how to use it. So how many of your decisions are truly your own? How often do you give trust because it feels right, only to find yourself tangled in invisible strings? Manipulation does not always feel wrong. Sometimes it feels like safety, or love, or loyalty. That is the problem. The person who makes you feel seen might also be the one adjusting your decisions without your consent. Power built on light is visible, but power built in darkness is harder to resist, because you cannot defend against what you do not detect. You may think you would never fall for this, but what if you already have? How many of your fears were taught to you, not to protect you, but to keep you tame? How many of your goals were planted just to keep you chasing illusions? If that voice inside you is growing louder, do not turn away, because what comes next will show you how easily your empathy becomes your leash. You were told empathy is your strength, that compassion is what makes you human, that understanding others leads to peace, connection, and trust. But what if that very strength, the one you were taught to cherish, is also the doorway through which control enters your mind? The more human you are, the more you feel for others, the more predictable you become to someone who does not feel at all. Empathy is not a weakness by itself, but in the presence of someone skilled in dark psychology, it becomes a vulnerability. It gives manipulators a precise map to your boundaries, your guilt, your forgiveness. They do not break the wall, they simply walk through the door you leave open, believing kindness protects you. In 1961, Stanley Milgram's experiment at Yale University revealed a chilling truth. Ordinary people, instructed by an authoritative figure, continued delivering what they believed were fatal electric shocks to another person, even when they heard screams. What stopped most participants was not the suffering of the victim, but the presence of resistance from authority. When empathy collided with obedience, obedience won. Now ask yourself, if you were one of those participants, would you have stopped, or would you have followed the calm voice behind you? The one that said it's okay, just continue. That calm voice is the same one used by abusers who exploit trust. It is the same tone you hear in institutions that say, it's for your safety, while taking your freedom. The voice does not yell, it reassures. It sounds like reason. Manipulators thrive on your desire to avoid conflict. They weaponize your empathy by creating situations where resistance feels cruel. They cry when you challenge them. They act wounded. They remind you of your promises. Suddenly, your refusal feels like betrayal. You begin to question your own morals instead of their actions. This is not a flaw in your mind. It is a design of your biology. Neuroscientific research has shown that the human brain is wired for social belonging. The anterior cingulate cortex, involved in physical pain, also activates when you feel social rejection. That means exclusion can hurt as much as injury. Manipulators know this. They do not need to attack your body. They only need to threaten your belonging. That is how power flows in silence, not through violence, but through isolation, not by shouting orders, but by making you fear that setting boundaries will leave you alone. The more empathy you have, the more guilt you feel. The more guilt you feel, the easier it is to control you. This dynamic is especially present in toxic relationships. Trauma bonding, for instance, is a psychological trap where intermittent reinforcement moments of love, followed by emotional cruelty, creates intense dependency. Victims stay not because they are weak, but because their empathy is hijacked. They believe they can fix the abuser. They believe the suffering has meaning. They confuse survival with healing. And that is where the illusion becomes lethal. Because the more you believe that your empathy can change someone who manipulates you, the longer you stay in a system designed to drain you. So what do? Turn off your empathy? No. But you must ask, does your empathy serve connection, or does it serve control? How many times have you kept quiet to keep the peace? How often have you forgiven someone just to avoid being seen as cold? You may think being good protects you, but goodness without awareness is not protection, it is exposure. And now the question you must face is harder. If your empathy makes you a target, are you willing to see who has already aimed? That answer will not come from comfort. It will come from what is waiting beneath your silence. Look closely at the relationships you call normal. Not the ones marked by obvious abuse, but the ones where you feel anxious before speaking your truth, where you walk on eggshells, where your needs are minimized, where love feels conditional and confusing. These are the spaces where dark psychology operates most quietly, and when it happens in personal relationships, it is harder to detect, harder to escape, and harder to admit. In intimate settings, manipulation is not loud, it is not always cruel. Sometimes it is wrapped in affection, masked as care, disguised as protection. And this is why so many victims stay, because the person who controls them also claims to love them. One of the most insidious tools in relationship control is gaslighting, a psychological tactic where someone makes you question your perception of reality. It begins subtly. You express concern and they say, "You're overreacting." You recall an event and they say, "That never happened." Over time, you stop trusting your memory. You doubt your instincts, you lose your internal compass, and in that confusion, control is gained. A 2014 study published in the Journal of Interpersonal Violence revealed how emotional manipulation in romantic relationships often escalates in phases. What starts as excessive charm or attention can evolve into isolation, guilt-tripping, and silent punishment. The target begins to feel unworthy, without the manipulator's validation. This is not love, it is dependency, constructed through psychological engineering. Love bombing is another tactic, often used at the beginning of such dynamics. The manipulator floods you with affection, praise, and promises. It feels overwhelming, in a good way, but that intensity is not affection, it is strategy. It bypasses your critical thinking, accelerates emotional bonding, and builds a debt you did not ask for. Later, when the affection fades, you find yourself chasing the high, trying to return to the beginning. But the beginning was the bait. And when you try to leave, a new tool appears: trauma bonding. This occurs when abuse is interspersed with small moments of relief, creating a loop of hope and despair. You become attached not despite the suffering, but because of it. The inconsistency activates deep psychological mechanisms, including dopamine release and fear of abandonment. You learn to survive the relationship, not to thrive in it. In family systems, the patterns are often harder to untangle. Manipulative parents may use guilt instead of violence. They may say things like, "After everything I've done for you," or "You're breaking my heart." These phrases seem emotional, but their function is tactical. They redefine your independence as betrayal, your growth as rejection. The goal is not mutual respect. The goal is control through obligation. The paradox you face is brutal. You want to love and be loved. But what happens when love is used as leverage? What happens when affection becomes a leash and vulnerability a weapon? You may ask, how do I know if I am being manipulated? Start by examining what is missing. Are you allowed to say no without punishment? Are you encouraged to grow, even if it leads you away from them? Are your boundaries respected or negotiated every time? The truth is not always in what they do. It is in how you feel. If you feel smaller around them, if your self-worth has declined, if your clarity has faded, that is not coincidence. It is erosion. Not all at once, but gradually, with every small compromise that was labeled love. The language of power in relationships is not just spoken, it is felt. And when the feeling is fear wrapped in affection, you are no longer in connection. You are in captivity. So now ask yourself, is your silence protecting the peace or protecting their control? Somewhere in that question lies the doorway back to yourself. But to walk through it, you must first recognize how far you have been led away. You believe you make your own choices. You believe your thoughts belong to you. Your actions are born from your will, and your beliefs are the result of logic and reflection. But what if they are not? What if they are not? What if most of what you call choice is nothing more than a conditioned response to hidden cues? This is not a philosophical game. This is the psychological structure of dark psychology, where freedom is an illusion carefully maintained to keep you compliant. The brain likes to believe in its autonomy, yet decades of psychological research suggest otherwise. In 2008, neuroscientist John Dylan Haynes conducted an experiment using functional magnetic resonance imaging. Participants were asked to press a button at any moment. The results showed that the brain had already made the decision up to 7 seconds before the participant became consciously aware of it. Your decisions, it seems, may begin before your awareness does. Now consider how often your free choices are shaped by environment, authority, and subtle suggestion. In 1984, psychologist Wendy Wood demonstrated that nearly 45% of daily behaviors are habitual, not consciously chosen. Habits are efficient, but habits are also programmable. This is the gap where manipulation enters. Advertisers use color, sound, and repetition to build preference. Politicians use fear and hope to shape perception. Charismatic leaders exploit insecurity to create loyalty. Each influence is invisible until you step outside it, and most people never do. In social settings, conformity governs more of your behavior than you might admit. Solomon Asher's classic conformity experiment in the 1950s showed how participants gave clearly wrong answers to visual questions just to align with a group. The pressure to fit in was greater than the urge to be right. Now extend that to beliefs, values, and identity. How many of your convictions are truly yours? Dark psychology thrives in this terrain. It does not need to overpower you. It only needs to present a path of least resistance. Most people will take it. When the system is built to reward obedience and punish dissent, the illusion of choice is maintained, while the outcomes are controlled. Think about this in your daily life. The career you chose, the relationships you maintain, the products you buy. Were these decisions built on authentic values, or were they influenced by fear, social pressure, and emotional manipulation? When someone praises you for being agreeable, do you feel seen or managed? When you obey out of fear of conflict, are you keeping peace or feeding control? And here is where the illusion becomes most dangerous. The more convinced you are of your independence, the less likely you are to question who benefits from your decisions. Imagine standing in a room with no walls, only mirrors. Every time you try to look outside, you see a version of yourself looking back. You cannot see the system around you because it reflects you so perfectly. This is what manipulation looks like when done well. You do not see the strings, you only feel the pull. Now ask yourself this: if someone knows your fears, your habits, your emotional triggers, and your social pressures, do they need to force you, or can they simply guide your next move? This is not science fiction. This is behavioral psychology used in marketing, politics, relationships, and leadership. So if you have ever said, "I had no choice," maybe that was not a metaphor. Maybe it was the system speaking through you. And now you are left with a deeper question. If free will can be influenced, does freedom truly exist? Or is it just a well-designed sensation, programmed to keep you calm while control wraps tighter around your mind? Before you try to answer, remember, the more certain you are of your freedom, the more invisible your cage becomes. You assume power is loud. You picture it in commands, debates, and dominance. But real power is often silent. It hides in pauses, in glances, in the things that are never said. The most dangerous influence does not shout. It listens. It observes your fears, your habits, your boundaries, and then uses that knowledge without ever needing to raise its voice. In the realm of dark psychology, silence is not emptiness. It is a weapon. A pause in conversation can create tension. A look that lingers too long can destabilize confidence. A refusal to answer questions breeds self-doubt. These small acts are not random. They are calculated. Silence, when used with intention, is not passive. It is invasive. Psychological abusers use silence to punish without confrontation. It is called stonewalling. The victim, confused by the lack of response, becomes desperate to reconnect. This desperation creates submission, and what appears as indifference is actually domination through emotional starvation. In 2010, researchers from Purdue University and the University of California found that ostracism, being ignored or excluded, activates the same brain regions as physical pain. Being silenced or shut out hurts in ways language cannot explain, and manipulators use this pain as leverage. They do not hit, they withdraw, and the silence becomes unbearable. Fear plays the same role, but not the kind that comes with threats. The more potent fear is subtle, the fear of losing love, status, safety, or identity. These fears do not paralyze the body, they paralyze the will. And once fear is present, it does not have to be reinforced constantly. A single experience, a single consequence, is often enough. The memory of fear becomes a leash. This is how control becomes self-sustaining. You silence yourself, you modify your behavior, not because you were forced, but because you remember what happened the last time. That memory does the work for them. Secrets, too, are part of this structure, not just the ones people keep from you, but the ones you keep for them. Manipulators create conditions where you become complicit in your own silence. They confide in you, create intimacy, and entangle your conscience. You hold their secrets out of loyalty, out of fear, or out of confusion, and in doing so, you bind yourself to their world. Philosopher Michel Foucault once noted that power is not just exercised through laws and institutions, but through knowledge and silence. What is not spoken becomes a boundary. What is concealed becomes untouchable. And when you cannot name something, you cannot fight it. So what do you fear naming? Think of a moment when you knew something was wrong, but said nothing, when silence felt safer than truth. That was not peace. That was not peace. That was a silent surrender. And that silence, whether chosen or enforced, is the soil where dark psychology grows best. Secrets are not just hidden facts, they are hidden rules, unspoken agreements about what is allowed and what is not. And when those rules benefit one person while harming another, you are no longer in a relationship, you are in a controlled system. The scariest part is how normal it all feels. You adapt to the silence, you internalize the fear, you carry the secrets like they are your own, and before you even notice, you are shaped by the very forces you thought you were resisting. Now consider this. How many of your values, your beliefs, your choices, how many were formed in the shadow of silence, fear, or obligation? If power operates through what is hidden, then awareness begins by shining a light not on others, but on what you have refused to see. And once you see it, the silence will break, but not without cost. Because the moment you speak, you no longer play by their rules. You have started to notice the patterns, the manipulation that once felt like care, the silence that once felt like peace, the pressure that once felt like duty. And now you are asking, quietly, if it is still possible to take your mind back. But here is the catch. Awareness does not erase influence. Seeing the game does not mean you can stop playing it. And the question that now confronts you is the most difficult one yet. Are you still being controlled, even as you try to break free? The brain, once conditioned, does not easily undo its programming. Repeated experiences form neural pathways. Behaviors become habits. Emotional responses become reflexes. And those reflexes were not designed by you alone. They were shaped by fear, by repetition, by rewards and punishments you did not always understand. This is not just psychology, it is neuroscience. In 2005, neuroscientists at Massachusetts Institute of Technology identified how habitual behavior is encoded in the basal ganglia, a region that operates outside of conscious control. The more often a pattern is repeated, especially under emotional stress, the more deeply it becomes embedded. So even when you recognize a manipulative dynamic, your body may still respond as if it were normal. That is the trap. Dark psychology does not rely on your ignorance. It survives even after exposure. That is why it is powerful, because even now, you are wondering if your resistance is authentic or just another reaction built into the system. Control can evolve. Once physical threats lose effect, psychological structures take over. Once fear no longer works, guilt is used. Once guilt fades, nostalgia steps in. The manipulator does not need to win every battle. They only need to keep you inside the structure. And sometimes they do it by letting you think you are free. This creates a mental double bind. If you fight back, you feel cruel. If you comply, you feel powerless. If you leave, you feel lost. If you stay, you feel trapped. The result is paralysis. You wait for clarity that never comes. You look for evidence that is always ambiguous. You ask yourself, am I overthinking? When the truth is, you are finally thinking clearly, for the first time in years. Here is the paradox you must wrestle with. To reclaim your control, you must first accept how deeply you lost it. You must admit that some of your choices were not truly yours, that some of your beliefs were installed, not born, that some of your strength was shaped by survival, not freedom. This is not weakness. This is the beginning of power, but not the kind you were taught to admire, not the power of dominance or defiance. The real power is awareness, the ability to feel fear and still observe it, to feel guilt and still question it, to feel loyalty and still choose truth over comfort. But even awareness has limits. The world is built to reward conformity, not clarity. Systems of control adapt quickly. They evolve with language, culture, and technology. And just when you think you are ahead, you find yourself influenced again by trends, by algorithms, by curated truths. So the question is not, can I break free once and for all? It is, am I willing to fight for my mind every single day? Because the cage is no longer made of bars. It is made of ideas, memories, fears, and patterns so familiar they feel like home. And here you are now, more awake than before, but still wondering, is the door open or just painted to look like it is? If you believe awareness is enough, stay comfortable. But if you suspect there is more beneath that awareness, do not relax yet. Because the final twist, the one you are not ready for, is the one waiting inside your own reflection. You have walked through the mechanics of influence, the architecture of manipulation, the biology of control. You have seen how silence becomes a weapon, how fear becomes a leash, how empathy becomes a code to be cracked. And now you are standing in the last and most dangerous place of all, your own mind. This is where the final illusion lives, the illusion of clarity, the belief that now, finally, you are free from the web. But are you? Because even now, as you reflect, your mind is searching for resolution, for an answer, for closure. That need itself is the final tether. The manipulator does not need to win. They only need to make you keep looking for a way to win. They count on your desire to fix, to understand, to reclaim. So here is where the mirror becomes a maze. Yes, you see the systems now. Yes, you can name the tactics. Yes, you know the rules of dark psychology. But do you trust yourself yet? Do you truly believe you can navigate the future without falling for another mask, another trap, another voice wrapped in warmth, but soaked in intent? The truth is hard. Power is not something you possess. It is something you maintain, moment by moment, in awareness. It does not sit inside titles or roles or strength. It hides in your ability to pause before reacting, to watch your own mind, to question the emotions that surge when someone pulls the right strings. That is real control, not dominance over others, but sovereignty over yourself. And that kind of control is quiet. It does not seek to convince. It does not shout its presence. It just stands still, rooted in what is real. But most people will not choose it, because it demands something that feels almost impossible in today's world: stillness. In a culture built on noise, urgency, and emotional triggers, your stillness will feel like rebellion. Your awareness will be misunderstood. Your refusal to play the game will make you seem cold, detached, even dangerous. Let them misunderstand, because the cost of being liked by everyone is the loss of who you really are. So where does this leave you? You are now aware that control is everywhere, that dark psychology is not an exception. It is the language spoken by those who crave advantage. And sometimes you have spoken it too, not because you are evil, but because you were surviving, because you were mimicking power to avoid powerlessness. But now you have a choice, not a simple one, not a clean one, a real one. You can go back to sleep, back to comfort, back to familiar patterns that reward your obedience and punish your awareness. Or you can stay awake, stay uncertain, stay uncomfortable, but aware. This video will not give you closure. That is not the point. You were not supposed to feel better. You were supposed to feel real. And if you are still here, then you are already different from who you were when this began. So write down what changed, what truth you saw in your own life, not for me, for you. Put it in the comments, so it exists outside your thoughts. Speak it so no one else can claim it. And if this opened something inside you, then do not keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who still thinks manipulation only happens in fiction, with someone who trusts too quickly, with someone who needs to see what you now see. Subscribe if you want more truths that cut deeper than comfort, that expose what was never meant to be spoken, that leave you thinking long after the video ends. The next secret is already growing. You will feel it before you hear it. And you will know when it comes that you were never alone in your search for what hides beneath the surface. Stay awake, stay aware, and remember, power never leaves. It only changes hands.